Okay, there we go. It should be working now. Just getting started here. Welcome to the Rhetoric Prof stream. I'm going to get rid of that background music. This is an unusual one that I'm doing today. This is just a different kind of vibe than what I usually do here. What I've come to usually do here is just read through texts and comment on them. And hopefully some people find that valuable, and we post those online. But this is one I'm kind of doing for myself because I wanted to think about some stuff that I've learned or maybe have failed to learn, I don't know, in the last 5 years of teaching. And I'm going to focus mostly on kind of teaching, as that is what I think is my actual job and mostly what I do. But I was employed at Northeastern University, or I mean still currently am. And I have a couple online summer classes that I'll do. So I'm still an employee here. But I've been employed here for 5 years, and I'll be moving on to DePaul University in Indiana next fall. And so I thought it might be a good thing for me to just kind of sit down and try to speak aloud, think aloud about some of the stuff I've learned while I've been at Northeastern, which is kind of an unusual institution in some ways. And if you're here or if you come in and you want to ask some questions, feel free to ask questions. This is a very relaxed thing. So I just have here a document. I spent some time this morning trying to get like a pardon the interruption style list of stuff, and I looked at a bunch of different things. I actually found some good videos online, but I just didn't have the time or honestly the technical wherewithal to pull it off. Maybe in the future I'll try to do that, or I'll have someone who's more sophisticated than I am, who knows how to not run into all the errors that I ran into trying to run JSON scripts, do it for me. But for now, I just have this Google Doc with just a couple themes to get me started. I'm going to work through them and talk about them, stuff that I feel like I've learned or not. And I'm just kind of sitting here. I have the window open. It's kind of a nice day. I got a little bit of sparkling water, watermelon flavored. So I'm just going to chat and think about some stuff that I've been doing and things that I feel like maybe worked, maybe didn't work, things that have changed. Try to narrate my experience a little bit to myself. And yeah, I don't know if that's interesting to anybody else, but we'll see. So I have here a few themes, and I thought it might be good to kind of first work through in my own thinking some of the changes or some of the things that I've done with the various classes that I've taught here. And I haven't taught too many different classes. My first maybe 3 years, I only taught speaking classes, which was in many ways great. And I kind of joke sometimes. I'm like, I made a mistake of telling people that I liked to teach these classes. And they're like, all right, well, then you could teach those forever. That's the only thing that you teach. And in fact, the only other classes that I got to teach came from the inability of other people to teach them, usually on relatively short notice. People are like, oh, well, who can fill in here real quick? And then once you get into one of those classes, they're like, all right, well, he's done it, so you can kind of keep doing it, right? I don't have a perfect setup here. I'm not at my usual spot. I thought I might change things up because I have a nice breeze coming into my living room here. It's really nice. So the first two classes that I taught were public speaking and what was called business and professional speaking. And I learned quite a bit from teaching both of these courses. Maybe I'll actually start with the professional speaking one. So, yeah, let's put this up. Because for me, this was really weird. When I first came here, there was they assigned me this class, business and professional speaking, and I was like, I'm not the person for this job. You know, I don't really know anything about that. I don't think I'm unprofessional, but I don't really have any experience that would authorize this, or I don't really know what people are looking for. And then it was explained to me by someone why this class exists in the first place, which was very helpful, by the current director of public speaking. And he was like, well, there was an argument with the administration about public speaking. And the argument was that all public speaking sections should become professional speaking. That public speaking was basically a thing of the past. And he argued against this. And he now works in the dean's office. His name is Michael Hopman, and we worked closely together for a number of years. And he was like, no, we need to have, like, there's important civic dimension here. It's part of the mission of the university. This is like really one of the few classes that everyone in the university can take that focuses on this stuff. So we should preserve it. But the way that he sold it to them is like one class is about PowerPoints, one class is about speaking without PowerPoints. I was like, that's good to know, because that's like how an administrator of the university thinks about things. So being like, okay, good. There's a PowerPoint class, and then there's like some other class that has some civic nonsense in it. But what does that actually mean? So there are textbooks about business and professional speaking, and I won't say that I did my full due diligence and went through all of them, but I looked at a few of them. One of my colleagues, she taught from one of them, and she's like, I have this kind of no-nonsense basic one, and I thought it was okay, but I just wasn't inspired to use those textbooks. And I'll get to textbooks as one of the themes that I might talk about a little bit later. And so my first rendition of trying to do business and professional speaking, I thought was a complete... I'll try to keep it PG here. I thought it was a complete Charlie Foxtrot. It was really, I thought went really bad. It was funny because there were a number of students who came from those sections that were like, wow, I really enjoyed this class. I got a lot. And a lot of them were business students. And I was like, I don't know what you got out of it, because to me, it seemed like a disaster. But I was like, I remember one point I had them doing, I was like, maybe we should do is like play act. So my theory of the class was like, okay, we're basically doing speaking, but we're imagining that we're in situations that are about like a business context. I was like, okay, so that seems like about the best I can do to adapt what I know to what they're doing. So I had them like play act certain things. And the first time around I did this, and it was like, I remember stopping it in the middle once. Like, you guys did a very good job, but I just don't think that this is good job. And then I just like never talked about it again. Like, didn't grade them on it. I was just like, this is not, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I have to go back and rethink in the middle of having done that. Which was a quite humbling experience to be like, I really don't know how to teach this class. Over time, I think what I did is actually rhetoricized the class even more. So, and I think a number of my colleagues who also teach it told me a similar thing. Those who have backgrounds in rhetoric, or even those who didn't, they're just like, I think it's just public speaking with, maybe a group presentation as an assignment. There are different ways to approach it. I guess the most theoretically serious approach I had to this particular class was to say, well, in professional context, what's different is that when we're speaking to audiences, we're not speaking as political equals, which is the imagination of public speaking. We're coming into a situation. There are, of course, always situations of power and difference that are, that make those situations not perfectly democratic, but that's the ideal. In a business or a professional context, there's no assumption of that. We have direct kind of hierarchies that are more or less legible. There's also those situations about power that are at play, that are social dynamics and things like that. But there's the official hierarchy of speech. Someone is an employee, someone is an employer, someone's a client, someone's offering a service. Whatever the situation is, it's legible to everyone there. And so the rhetorical situation or the speaking situation is determined by that context in some very basic way. And so how do we recognize how to deal with those various contexts? So that's one of the ways that I thought about it, and I thought that was okay. But to be honest, even though the students here at Northeastern, there's a special program of co-op where so many of them have, they take a year or 6 months, or they do multiple different co-ops sometimes. Some of them have many co-ops. So they're working directly in industry, sometimes ones that they wish to be employed in. It is, I think, kind of basically an internship program, but we have a lot of marketing around it that makes it seem really important and really crucial to the students to be able to work with these partners the university has, whatever. Maybe I should have added that to the list of themes. I kind of remain underwhelmed by this part of it, but I didn't really deal with it that closely except through the students. The students also don't really have that experience, and the professional contexts have changed dramatically. Like, what's a professional context in remote work? What's the professional context for someone who's working a service job? Is that the same one that for someone who's like in finance? And these contexts are just too different for there to be like a set way of going about imagining them. I even had like a weird bit of consulting work that about as literally as this could happen fell in my lap. I didn't seek it out. I don't have a website. I don't even have business cards. Wow, I'm really not a businessy kind of guy. I should get business cards next time. But I did some of this consulting work and then talking to the person that was setting it up to do public speaking training, basically, with a group of people, which I learned a lot from, too. I think I made some big mistakes, but it ended up working out pretty well for some of them. The one-on-one sessions went okay, they felt. So there was two. They're like, it's very academic. I was like, yeah, that's what I am. Gotta take it down. Okay, but one of the things she's talking about is, I was like, well, what's the kind of dress code or vibe, or just like, what's the situation that you often find yourself in? She's like, it really depends. When we meet with Twitch or Twitter or one of these Silicon Valley people come in without shoes on. In other contexts, it's extremely formal. So even for people that are dealing with professional contexts exclusively, I don't think there's like a single set of expectations of decorum, which I think is what people really imagine when they imagine professionalism. So what I gave a speech to a student club recently, talking about professionalism as one of the themes of the speech about public speaking. And for me, the professionalism is really not a style. It's a kind of very basic reminder about decorum, and that one should attend to the decorum of a particular situation and try to embody it. And so that professionalism if we think of professionalism as a style, it's mostly a negative one. It's a style that says, don't do a number of things. It's a set of prohibitions, don't look gross, don't swear. So there's a lot of ways to act unprofessional. And really that's what it means. Don't act in an indecorous manner in a way that's very obvious. Whereas professional, like some people do have a positive virtue associated with that. Someone comes off professionally, they speak professionally. That usually has a sense of a certain kind of polish, but how to achieve that polish, to me, isn't really answered by what most people mean by professionalism, even if that's the quality that they're seeking. To me, that has something to do with the questions of style that are better addressed in the tradition of rhetoric. So something called in the theory of style, the ancient theory of style, there's the plain style, there's the grand style, and then there's the kind of, sometimes it's just called the middle style, which is a certain kind of elegance. And I think the elegant style is maybe an approximation of what people want in a professional context. Something that is elevated above simple plain talk. It addresses, it has a kind of decorous feel to it. It feels a little bit more impersonal, but it's also pleasant in some kind of basic way. But mostly it's about not being unprofessional. Nevertheless, what I ended up doing was breaking down the various kinds of elements that might come into a basic PowerPoint presentation, which might be the use of an image in a slide. So then there's assignment, just use one image that epitomizes something. Or you're going to present factual information. You have to recontextualize the factual information. You have 2 slides to do it. So what I did is I tried to put high levels of restrictions on the assignments, have the students focus on one exercise or one element of composition in a speech and develop it from there. And we did a lot of other kind of speaking exercises and things like that. I think what similar, so now kind of going back also onto public speaking, what was similar in both of these courses and what I kind of changed through the experience of the pandemic was a much greater emphasis on composing in speech. And part of this came out of the pandemic, actually. So I'm teaching public speaking in this hybrid context. There's like 2 or 3 people in the room with masks on. It's kind of like there's a lot of ambient sound. There's people on Zoom. Some have cameras on, some don't. And be like, okay, this is a difficult situation. And for a lot of people imagining speaking, I had actually recently, again, talked with one student that I originally taught in this context. And she was quite upset about the fact that she's like, well, I'm really taking public speaking and these people are just appearing online. They're not really doing the real thing. And I've even had people laugh. I'm saying I'm teaching online public speaking and they're like, that's ridiculous. That's a contradiction in terms. Because most people imagine what public speaking is getting over your fear of speaking in front of a room of people. That's not my interest in public speaking. I know it's an element of it, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. But because of the conditions of the pandemic, I was like, having people on timers was something that went away fast. I was like, timed speeches, it just doesn't make sense when people's like connections are going in and out. So I started to loosen that up. And I kind of loosened requirements at first as a way of accommodating all of the different technical issues that were going on. But this produced an interesting effect, which is people became more anxious. And then when there was like whatever there was like the one kind of bright line requirement that they had to be like, okay, it needs to be 5 minutes. So like the last thing to remain is like, I need to do this particular thing in the speech. People would kind of latch onto it. And all of the speeches would become twisted, or not all of them, but many of them would become kind of twisted around the one requirement. So one thing I realized is that in both of the speaking classes, having a kind of minimal description of an assignment, a minimal rubric, no kind of like clock timed things, making all of these things about judgment rather than about a measurable standard, did produce anxiety in students, but led to much, much better performances in the end from students. I think a lot of students came out of this with a sense of like, wow, I didn't realize I could do that. And it gave me an insight into one of the problems in speech pedagogy in general, which is we want to as instructors feel that we're doing justice to our students. And so we want to make sure that we're very focused on making sure that our judgments are related to a clear and objective standard. So people will be like, okay, well, I need you to submit a outline, and then I will mark your speech against the outline, which comes from a good place of saying, this is what you wanted to do in the speech. And I have a standard that you created on the basis of your own desire for the speech, and I'm going to evaluate it in that terms. Or we're going to look at things that are countable, like speech fillers, percentage of eye contact made. We focus on things that make speech look like it's a mechanical art. And even some of the software that I'm using is like, has these as plug-in comments. We like, you have like these like set things, and the imagination of telling someone how to speak is you just kind of point out these mechanical flaws in their delivery. In fact, I had one student who was upset with me in a reflection, because he's like, I gave speeches, but the problem was always with what I was saying rather than how I was saying it. And that doesn't seem fair. And I think that image of public speaking, which is what I think a lot of public speaking classes do, we have to really work against that as public speaking instructors to get to something else. But I think a lot of instructors don't feel comfortable really talking about the content of what students are saying. And so it produces a style of speaking, a kind of hothouse flower style of speaking that only exists in the classroom. And it's kind of timed, outlined, but the quality of what's being said, and I don't want to say this for everyone, I'm not trying to judge other instructors as being kind of bad or wrong what they're doing, but in my experience, the quality of what's being said, when students have that level of clarity, they feel freed from the judgment of the quality of what they're saying because they are meeting the correct standard. And this produces all sorts of problems with what they're saying. They're like, well, I've made all of my formulas, my ethos formula. I have done my verbal citations. I have made the appropriate amount of eye contact. And we produce these alien speeches. So how do we really get to what someone is trying to say? How do we have a standard of speaking? I think for me, this is honestly answered by a couple things. One is developing a vocabulary for how we talk about speech in the classroom. For me, it is obviously deeply informed by what this channel is named after, the tradition of rhetoric and its vocabulary, some of which I try to introduce to the students. And I have a lot to say about it. And it doesn't really matter, though, unless the students can also recognize that in an example or in a performance. So I try to have live feedback. This is another thing that I did in both of these speaking classes, is I changed my approach of having kind of written feedback or having kind of silent feedback after the speech, which also I think came from a good place, intentionally being like, I want to have it kind of very rich set of feedback, and I don't want anyone to feel even more afraid of the context by having criticism immediately. I don't remember exactly when I changed my approach to that, but one thing I will say, I get all sorts of positive and negative feedback from students, but one thing I have gotten very consistently since I started doing that is that I have given them a lot more feedback. The students experience the amount of feedback that they get when it's live in person and directed to the details of the speech that they just gave. They experience it as more feedback, a more enriched experience, even if it's difficult and sometimes bracing. And they also hear that from their peers. So this kind of feedback in the medium of speech as well. It's all about kind of emphasizing speech as a medium for thought and communication, rather than deferring to writing as your outline is where the true speech is. My writing to you is where the true speech is. The written rubric is where the true speech is. The true speech being in speech produces anxiety both for students and for instructors. And that's exactly what I think one of the main things I'm coming out of Northeastern with is the importance of orality and defending orality as a medium of thought that has standards that are in some ways, not in every way, unique to it. So two other things that I've done that are different in the speaking classes. One is having a theory of speech composition, of what I call speech drafts, to the students, so that they should begin composing their speeches in speech rather than by writing their speeches or even doing an outline. So I tell them to take their phones, record their voices into it, listen back, be dissatisfied, listen to the places where there are speech fillers, not to say, I was so bad, but at places where there were possibilities of other thoughts that you had that might go in other directions, make a decision about them, and then do it again. So creating a kind of series of drafts in speech as a method for speech composition, to me, is something that is actually something a little bit. I'm not proud of everything that I've done at Northeastern, actually, mostly. I'm filled with regret. That's kind of the feeling I have at the end of most semesters. But I am proud of this idea of the speech draft. I intend to write a little bit about it and try to get something published before, because I think there's been a major issue in rhetorical pedagogy which thought about composition as solely through writing, and therefore a good speech is basically just a recited written speech. So thinking about composition in the medium of orality, but also helped and assisted by writing, that's totally fine, I think is one of the advances I made as a teacher in my time at Northeastern. The other one was something I used to actually not only not do, but I had a principle against do, was performing the speech assignments myself. So I would give the students a speech assignment, and then I would do an example. Part of this came from the fact that when I came in, there was a set of assignments that someone else had created for the curriculum, which I then was in this role the past couple of years, and I've kept most of those assignments because I think that they're good. I think that one of them has to do with a kind of declamation exercise. Another one is debate. But having the students I really want an example, and I do have the belief that examples are better rules or guides than rubrics, which get kind of overfitted responses, and then you get into this problem where you're like, something's wrong with this speech, but I can't say anything on the basis of the rubric as to why it's wrong. And so therefore this kind of pedagogical opportunity is lost because they're like, well, I didn't do anything wrong. And it becomes this kind of like, you can't touch me, no lo me tangere. You can't touch me. I didn't do anything wrong. And we get into this kind of error finding mentality rather than the example, which is an aspirational kind of rule, being like, okay, can you see what is the ruliness of the example? Can you extract that and seeing how this might relate to your performance? Involves students in a model of judgment where they have to look at speech performance of their peers, of me, of examples that we look at to try to formulate what they think good speech is. And it allows us to kind of talk about that. We have different judgments about speeches, especially example speeches, and they can kind of look at it. But for the specific assignments, they're like, well, what's an example? Can we see a student example? And at first I did try to find video clips of my students doing this. There's something about watching a video, even of a good speech, watching a video of someone speaking in a classroom just doesn't capture even what's dynamic about it. It doesn't do a good job of it. And I think I wanted to craft those examples a little bit more closely and also show them I have some skin in the game. So I started doing the examples myself. And, I used to really think that this was a bad idea because I was like, this becomes too theatrical. And there's still some concerns I have, which is if it goes very well, students feel like, oh, well, I can't do that, so I'm never going to measure up, and they feel bad about themselves. Or if it goes very badly, they're like, well, you didn't do so good. So, but I've become kind of softer on that. I don't think that's really the response. It just opens up a sense of like what might be desirable about speaking in this way, which is really, I think, more important. Being like, well, this doesn't have to be thought of as an assignment. I'm trying to reach you, so I'm showing them an attitude that I have towards the assignment, but also towards speaking to them that they can bring in. I think that this has worked quite well. I don't know if I'll keep it forever if I teach another public speaking class, but my idea of modeling speech, I've become much more open to, and I think overall it kind of worked. So those are some of the takeaways I have from the speaking classes that I taught. Some of the things that I'm questioning and that I wonder about has to do with reading in those classes, what to read. I've tried out different things. I have a bunch of different essays that I assign. I've tried to have them read a book for the last couple, which one is called Talking to Strangers by Daniel Allen. The semester has gone every time that we've gotten like 2/3 of the way through the book. We never finished it. And, you know, the kind of important bits maybe at the end. And I think that I'll talk a little bit about kind of reading level of students in a bit maybe. But I think one issue is the connection between reading difficult stuff and direct assignments is not there. So that produces some kind of worry or anxiety for students. But I think that the other question is like, well, what do we want to read about? And so for this last online session, I think I'm going to try an experiment where I want them to choose readings where, you know, they're going to choose a topic that they want to be able to speak about. That's kind of the idea of the class. What do you wish that you were able to speak better about? And I want you to read, and I want you to talk about the readings. So I'm going to try that out rather than putting forward a set of readings that are about public or something that's maybe, I don't think of it as that theoretical, but I think for the students, it seems very abstract and it's hard for them to connect to it. So I think maybe having them choose some readings maybe is an answer to that. Another answer to it would be the textbook, but I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so then I want to go to the argumentation class that I taught. This is called Principles of Argumentation. I taught argumentation when I was a graduate student at the University of Pittsburgh, and I was really excited about the opportunity to come back to it. Oh, hey, what's up, aliens? Yeah, I'm leaving, but I'm just going to another university, so, you know, you're still around. How you doing? Good to see you. So I'm just kind of doing this, as I said at the top of the stream. I was like, this is kind of a different thing. I'm just trying to work through some thoughts by talking aloud that I have about teaching for the last few years. And so I'm going very slowly as usual, and I'm just kind of starting with some general practical themes that come from these classes that I taught. So maybe in this one I'll try to show an example from this particular syllabus, because so for this one, argumentation, previously I taught it in a way where I was like, we're just going to read a bunch of stuff, we're going to have some debates. And that worked pretty well. That worked pretty well when I was a grad student. I was like, hey, let's read stuff, let's talk about argumentation. And it was like a little bit messy, it was a little all over the place, but I had some good interactions with students through that, and started one assignment that I've recently done again, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But this time I was like, hey, I think I need another approach to this, because one thing I knew about this class was that it doesn't make a lot. And the only reason that students initially take it is because it has like a specific requirement attached to it that they need to take, some of the students, about kind of formal reasoning. So I was like, okay, how can I make this class relate to my view of argumentation as something that isn't a single body of knowledge that's like already decided upon? How can I communicate that in a way that's like not overwhelming? Because it's supposed to be an 1,000 level class, which is also something I've started to attend to more through conversations with some of my colleagues. I used to just ignore it, be like, who cares? But I think it probably makes sense. It gives you a sense of, you know, where your audience is at in terms of students, what you might expect. So I've started to take that into consideration a little bit. So what I came up with was this kind of document. I'm gonna, yeah, I feel comfortable doing this. So I came up with this document, 9 personas for argument. And I'll show them to you oh, here, you see them already. So these 9 personas are with my colleague and friend Matt Pitchford. He helped me write some of these. I used the Dungeons and Dragons, Great Reflections and Echoes, some things that I had to learn as an engineering student approaching creative classes like writing and game design. Oh, I'd love to hear about that. More about that. Oh, the next university is DePaul University, not DePaul, DePaul. It's a very small university in Indiana. So you'll be seeing more stuff from me there, but it'll probably be a little bit different. My position there involves being the director of debate. So you might see students debating on the channel rather than me talking about readings as much. But we'll see. I don't know. I have a lot to learn about what life is like there. So here, my idea was to take something I used to be really angry about, is people identifying themselves, whether it's astrologically or through the Myers-Briggs test, being like, I'm this type of person and therefore, and that becomes like a reason to explain things in the world. And, I used to get very angry about this and my friends would laugh at me. So I was like, well, I taught in the criticism course, another student, he wrote a paper about QAnon, and he was like, well, it really reminds me of being QAnon. Actually, he was really angry at first. And he's like, well, these people are more sympathetic to me now, even though I don't like what they're doing, because they're basically all playing a Dungeons and Dragons game. And that's like, they're like lonely, isolated people. And QAnon looks a lot like Dungeons and Dragons. So I was like, that's very interesting insight. And he talked about his own experience as a dungeon master. I was like, well, maybe I'll use what would be the kind of Kenneth Burke talks about in his Rhetoric of Hitler's Battle, using the patterns of thinking, patterns of religious thought that Hitler talks about in Mein Kampf as a way of inoculating people against fascism. Like you can't just say, oh no, the idea is bad. Like there's a pattern of thought and feeling there that is the reason that it's powerful to people, and that needs to be kind of appropriated and reused or kind of introduced in other ways. So I was thinking about this way that people really respond very strongly to having some kind of topology of identity, even though I dislike that. I was like, well, can I use that for teaching? So I decided to just take the Dungeons and Dragons thing and made an alignment chart. This one doesn't show you the alignment chart, but it kind of goes in order where there's like, I've changed the meaning of it, but it started out as being kind of like lawful good, lawful neutral. So lawful good was the dialectician, lawful neutral was the advocate or whatever. I changed the meaning of the axes. I got like a little bit lost in the sauce of how to think about these things. And I was like, okay, well, there's lawful, practical, chaotic. And then going down, there would be ideals of argument, and then something like neutral or like truth focused on argument. And then there's the effective argument. So people might be a propagandist. That's an approach to argumentation. So each week in the course, after a couple introductory weeks, we move through all of these different ones. And I had a lot of fun with this class, which I've only taught for a couple years. But I had a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I want to transform this into a book about argumentation, a role player's guide, where we'll have these personas. We'll also have some kind of setting, some tools or weapons for argument analysis and argument production, for criticism and invention. So basically a kind of rhetorical handbook, but rhetorician is only one of the personas. So I want to give some credence to all of these other perspectives on argumentation. And I think that having this perspectival view on knowledge, to take a slightly more theoretical view, it reminded me of something, an article that I go to a lot, which is from the Scientific American a few years ago, published about the homunculus model of the brain, which appears in all of these textbooks. And then they were like, well, wait a minute, this is just a teaching model, but people are interpreting it because they're reading it in a textbook as a real model. And so for me, this is a problem that people might kind of latch on to the models that are accessible to them and make that into a reality. But that's why actually ramping up the fictional element of some of these teaching models, or models that can prevent people from overfitting or overcorrecting their classroom knowledge as the ideal of knowledge, and seeing this, no, this is pedagogical, this is propedeutic to you having your own understanding of how argumentation works. So trying to both make this a relatively consistent set of distinctions, though there's a lot of overlap, and giving the students, each week kind of coming in and performing a different attitude towards argumentation, I think was relatively successful. I heard a lot of positive feedback from some students. I know there were some issues that I had with the class. One was, on my own end, was I asked them to analyze an argument that they found in the world. Could be any argumentation. I think this was the right thing to do, and broke it into 3 sections. First was to reconstruct it, then to analyze it, and then finally to evaluate it. And I think that I might actually do that assignment again, but I'm going to give them much clearer instructions of because I was like, you can analyze this using any of these tools. And then students who are kind of assignment brained try to go with the tool they think is the simplest, and they do a bad job, and they don't really do very much. So I'm going to have them like work through a bunch more of the different, like the tests of evidence and stasis theory, and have them make sure that they do all of these so I can evaluate them better and help them along a little bit more. But I think the idea of you can take these attitudes towards argument, towards any argument that you see in your life, was the promise of the course, and it seems to have paid off. So I feel relatively good about that course. I had a lot of fun with it. And I guess I'll say one thing I said I was going to say. At the end, the final project is, what's your own attitude towards argument? Pick one of these personas or make up your own. One student made up her own, which was the loser. I'm the loser of argument, which was a very funny final reflection. She's like, I don't mind losing arguments or whatever. Then you also have to choose an ally, an enemy, and a foil. So it was this kind of role play thing, but had a serious dimension to it. Some of the students had fun with it. I think this term, there's a lot of struggles that people are having. Didn't feel as fun as maybe previous terms, but oh well. The other alternative assignment was improversy. Students, we made t-shirts. They chose 3 topics they thought were important to people in Boston from reading some of the newspapers that I told them to read. And we printed up a bunch of slips that were like menus. They went on to the T here, which is like the subway, and they engaged people. They probably had a total of 25, 30 debates throughout the day, both on the T, and then we went back to campus and they did it there as well. And it was a fascinating experience for them and for me, and I'd done something like this before in Pittsburgh, but it's given me a lot to think about. The reflection that the students produced, they produced as a kind of podcast, which was filled with lots of interesting things. Some of the things they talked about were language barriers. Some people couldn't debate in Spanish, and they were unable to talk to some people, whereas the 2 other students, one is a native Spanish speaker, and the other was, did his best, and they tried to have a kind of debate in Spanish. So but the native Spanish speaker was like, the arguments I prepared were in my head were in English, so it was hard for me too to adapt. One of the debates was about relocating people to, and I should say, the students had the debate, and then the people were asked to judge them. So the way of inviting the public in was to say, what do you think is the better argument? And the purpose for the students was to say, well, try to understand what people are using in the real world to evaluate argumentation. And they found lots of different things. Some people were like, I'm evaluating on the basis of how well structured it is, or whether I like you. And some people were like, you didn't talk about this point that you didn't know about, or whatever. There were all these different things, these moments of evaluation that people used. One of them was about relocating a homeless encampment in Boston to another area, which has been an issue that's been very important here. 2 women were having this debate, and a man was like, hey, come over, talk to me. And he's like, he had lived there for 20 years. And his position was, it's complicated. It's worth debating. It's hard to know what to do. And they talked for a long time. So for me, this actually gave me, maybe I'm a kind of naive person, but it gave me a different sense of what we might do with debate. And I'm wondering about, it's hard to imagine, I don't have it all worked out, but a kind of institution where because people responded. I actually thought that it was not going to work in Boston. I was like, in Boston, people are kind of cold and aloof. I have the stereotype of the city. And that wasn't the experience at all. A lot of people and a lot of different kinds of people were really open to do this, even on the train where people are maybe going or coming from work, and people don't really want to talk to each other. People had earbuds in, and they pulled them out in order to have this kind of unusual thing. Is it possible to scale this in some way so that there are these places where we literally talk to strangers, where we literally have political conversations with strangers that are low on the level of confrontation, which means you get to make a decision, but you're not involved. You don't have to make the argument yourself. Low in the level of cost and buy-in. The t-shirts cost a little bit of money, but other than that, there really was no cost to it. So thinking about creating opportunities for democratic encounters that are really argumentative rather than dialogical, or, we're just kind of having a nice time, is something that I'm thinking about. Based on how well these particular students did with the assignment, I was quite impressed. So that was the argumentation class. Then I'll come to criticism, which was the writing class that I taught. And I think this is probably the class that I would do the most differently in the future. And I changed it up a lot, and I didn't have a whole lot of time to prepare it the first time through. Students ended up producing very interesting work in every section that I taught it. There's really great stuff. And the model was that you create a diary. I gave them diary prompts. They're kind of working through various ideas, collecting stuff, finding stuff that they want to interpret in some way. And then slowly having a series of assignments that would build towards the paper. I think that the one element that, so they had a lot of freedom in what topic they would choose, and that was, some people struggle with that, which is normal for my classes. People struggle with the amount of freedom that they have. But I think that usually has a positive effect on a number of people who feel that they are getting a chance to talk about something that they care about, and that this weirdly produces a problem for them because they're like, well, now I actually care about it. I can't just like treat it as an assignment and phone it in. So it's a little bit of a trick that I've learned, which is if you demand that people care about something, then their motivations become different than the motivations I have to supply. So it doesn't always work, but for me, that is something I'm probably going to continue. But I've learned a lot about teaching writing, and I really, really enjoy. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed giving feedback, especially on the kind of like informal process part of the writing that students do. I kind of look forward to it, and I really enjoy doing that. I think that I probably give a little bit too much feedback for some students. They're not used to, it feels really negative to them to get criticism of their writing. They're very attached to the writing that they're already able to produce. And so if issues are pointed out or questions are made about it, they react. For them, it has like a real strong effect on their sense of themselves initially. And I think I need to maybe make some more accommodations for that and ease them into it. I don't know how to do that practically, but I don't have to worry about that right now. I don't teach a writing class like this yet, which is a writing intensive class. But I think I also learned a lot from what the students chose to write about criticism. I mean, I learned a lot from reading their papers, but being in the position where I don't really know what's going on. So in the first part of the class, we're reading all these difficult, dense texts and trying to have them understand what it means to offer a critical interpretation, develop critical distance, something like that. But there's no kind of central body of knowledge. Again, that's a kind of theme in all of these classes, which can be frustrating. And then the kind of tables turn, and they're writing their project, and like I don't really know. I have to ask them the question. I don't really know what they're talking about. They're talking about K-pop stands, or they're talking about Travis Scott or stuff I don't really know anything about. So I like that element where I become the ignoramus, and I'm like, I don't understand, and they have to explain it to me, and that helps them a little bit because they see something about audience that is more difficult for them to access when they're in the position where they feel like they don't know, and they're always kind of trying to write towards the knowledge of the teacher professor. But I think this is actually pretty well established now in a lot of composition classes. This is nothing I came up with. This is almost old hat now style. I think some of the things that I surprisingly feel are important now is I think that though I like the stuff that we read in the class and the conversations were really active and vibrant, and I think students get a lot out of them. Some of them did say like we should begin the writing even earlier, and I'm like, well, we're doing it the whole time. But I think there is a way of just like making a whole class about developing one argument. And I think that's what I would make criticism into in the future, is really focusing it even more so on argumentation and letting them find their own critical tradition themselves. So I think that's one of the things. I also think a vocabulary for talking about writing and language is important. And for me, weirdly, grammatical vocabulary is very helpful for a certain element of talking about writing. And I think that people have a lot of reactions to grammar because grammar can be used as a weapon against people. Prescriptive grammar can tell people that they're wrong. But thinking about grammar not as a set of norms about what is correct or not correct, but rather a vocabulary, just the vocabulary of what is a clause, what's a subject, and what's a predicate, can help us understand what choices we're making in our writing already. And I think actually that helps soften some of the subjective feeling that people have, because they're just like, when a sentence isn't working, they're like, I'm bad at writing. If there's no vocabulary and you're like, the sentence is bad, who made the sentence? I did. I am bad. And if there's no way of thinking more mechanically about what choices are available to you, which is, again, part of the rhetorical tradition, the writing part of the rhetorical tradition, I think it becomes more important of thinking through this vocabulary, how to update that vocabulary for the practical concerns of students writing today. I didn't crack that at all. I feel like I really failed in like knowing where to put that particular knowledge. I did it too late, did it too much. I don't know. But that's something that I'm going to be thinking about in the future, teaching writing. Okay, grading and evaluation. I recently came across something that Thorstein Veblen, because I was interested in, sometimes I've been making an argument for a long time, and I'm like, wait a minute. Why do I believe that? And then I go and look, and almost always I'm wrong. So I've been making an argument about the boards of universities having changed in some important way in the 1970s, and I was like, well, wait, I can't remember why I thought that. So I went and I spent a morning doing some reading about it, and came across Thorstein Veblen, who I know, who's a great early 20th century critic and thinker, and I don't know. He's kind of I don't think he's really in a discipline. And he was talking about grading and how grading he was complaining about grading. It's this managerial technique on students like that. This could be written today. This is the same thing. He would just switch around C's and A's. Like he had this kind of total lack of care towards it, which would be harder to pull off today with the other pressures that exist in the university for students and for faculty. But I think here grading was like both more and less of a problem. And there's like one element that I think I really want to distinguish between grading and evaluation. So I like having a lot of opportunities to evaluate students' work that are not graded. And I think in the future, I want to do that more, as much as possible. And there's something that the American university has, which is like, we should have more assignments with more diverse modalities because it gives students more chances. And I'm like, this is the wrong approach to this problem. It's like, this is constantly creating more work for students, more activities that they feel they have to do, and they approach them with the sense of kind of like fear, dread, anxiety, necessity, or even worse, like lack of concern, or a kind of unwarranted confidence. Like, well, I'm good at homework, so I already know how to do this stuff. So this model doesn't work. Grading doesn't lead a lot more graded work does not lead to better outcomes, in my opinion. So I want to have more evaluation where we can talk about judgment and judgments about what constitutes good or bad work, and then de-emphasize grading as much as possible. Weirdly, even though students here, I think, probably are even more tensely wound in general than at Pittsburgh, where I taught before, and where I've had many tears in the office hours about B pluses. I was just like, I can't relate. I'm sorry. But whatever. It's a very high cost. Students live with the myth that these grades have a great deal of significance on their future prospects. And given how much money they're paying, you can see why it would lead to, they're going to disappoint their parents. They're not going to get the job. Sometimes do they make this argument cynically? Absolutely. But the sense that grades have to be perfect is just, again, kind of like those other things. You give anybody a standard for correctness, and they're going to try to meet that standard. And so making that a standard of judgment has weirdly changed student response. So almost in a way that I still kind of feel like, I'm like, is this the right thing to do? I've basically not even given any of my classes rubrics at this point. I just kind of assign them grades, and I don't get very many complaints, at least directly directed to me, maybe behind my back. I imagine there's quite a bit of complaining, but I think when there's a removal of this sense of, because people, again, I think in good faith have this idea of like, there's this idea of contract grading, or the syllabus is a contract and grades are a contract. I'm meeting my terms, you're meeting your terms. And I think that there's this idea that this is helping students feel responsible. But I'm like, I think this is actually shows a lack of trust. It shows both a lack of trust in you, like you're not going to meet the qualifications or standards of this class unless we have some kind of contract that's ahead of time. And also lack of trust in myself, like my judgment does matter. This class doesn't make sense if my judgment doesn't matter. So I'm not going to pretend it's not a judgment. And this is a question of subjectivity, and where does subjectivity arrive in education? I think I have a lot to say about this. This is something I've been thinking about and writing a little bit about, which is, I think, a general, and this is across really every faction and element of the university. I would say even much broader than the university, which is an anxiety about the subjective. The subjective is seen as totally arbitrary. Judgment is, the fact that judgment and justice are related to each other etymologically is forgotten. Judgment has to be made objective and kind of authorized by something that's outside of subjects, outside of subjectivity. And I think this has produced all sorts of bad and weird effects. Really, profound ones. And I think that it's odd that in then removing those and kind of adopting their position, people are kind of not totally, and again, I'm subjective here, and I have, there's selection bias and confirmation bias. The response is pretty positive, and I would say this is much more obvious in public speaking than in any other class, where the students are very nervous. They're like genuinely scared, some of them, and they get up and speak, and they know I will speak to them and say what they have to say, and I don't think that there's any, I think that they get better and more confident because they recognize this is just somebody's judgment, and that I can respect this judgment on the basis of what its reasons are, rather than on the basis of the arbitrary social position from which it is said. So if we try to take our, yes, originally I have this position arbitrarily from their point of view, they don't know me from anything. But if I can authorize my own authority through the reasons that I give, show its practicality, its value, its principled basis, as best I can, as best as I can communicate, as any human being might. We go back to what Gadamer talks about in Truth and Method, about authority, the importance of authority. Authority here being that one defers to opinions that have reasons that you can't access yourself, or that you are beginning to access but don't yet possess yourself. So it's authority is not just a kind of arbitrary set of conditions of social power, which I think is a certain kind of well-meaning, left-leaning, pedagogical, critical pedagogy idea that I, at one point, operated under with an extreme feeling of compunction and guilt. And I don't want to say I moved past it, but I have a different position now, which is that authority has to be justified, but it can't be gotten rid of, and it is extremely valuable. The authority should be used not for contracts and laws and terms, but for judgment. And that's my main kind of positive takeaway about grading and evaluation. Oh, thanks, Spambot. Cool. All right. Next is the library. There is no library for a lot of the time I was at Northeastern. And there was a building called the library, but there were no books in it. And this came originally under a theory of COVID's COVID's way of being transmitted. People were like, well, it's going to be transmitted on the surfaces of books and stuff, so we have to sanitize them. But really, it was a way of, cynically, I think, reorganizing university space at a place where space is very cramped. And the books were moved to Connecticut. Boston is in Massachusetts. And so when you ordered a book, it would be shipped on a truck to the university. Oh my gosh, the nose itching thing has started again already. I really wonder why that. I think it's just like my orifices are more open to the allergens in my environment when I do this, but maybe it'll be different in Indiana. Anyway, not having a library as a kind of center of intellectual life was really damaging to the teaching that I did and to my own life. And I think that people have the wrong idea of like, they're like, well, you think that students are really going to go and read books? How naive. They don't read anything, right? This is kind of the cynical position. But I came across this article by Archibald MacLeish, who at one point was, I think, the librarian of the Library of Congress. He was an important librarian. I know he was many other things. He was an author, a poet, and a spy. I'm aware of that. But he wrote this really good piece about the importance of the library for the campus, for like the theory of a university, which is that there is an ongoing, something like this, there's an ongoing conversation of knowledge, which is organized in the library itself. The library represents that there's some relationship between the stuff that you know and the stuff that you don't know and stuff that you might know, that all of these things are organized and related in some way. And you can experience that directly, but it's an architectural argument as addition to the actual information science. So this removal of the books into information systems isn't just a question of like, oh, I love the smell of old glue and moldering books and stuff. It's an important way of exploring the relationships between knowledge. And so there's all this kind of talk about de-siloing people and interdisciplinarity. And my argument for this is that the best institution of interdisciplinarity is the library. And the library has to be something that's defended by the professoriate as an institution Not just because, we're doing our kind of good liberal thing of being like, oh, the poor librarians, they're always kind of being harassed. They're even worse off than us. And we have this kind of condescending attitude to them. But, I love the librarians and they do great work, and research librarians. I didn't have a great experience here at Northeastern myself, unfortunately. But alas, they had cuts and blah, 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 blah. No, it's because the library is an ideal. And the library has to be defended in its reality for that ideal to be able to be communicated sufficiently. And this comes down to some very practical things where a student gets engaged in at work, and I'm like, well, here, you might go to the library and look around there and see what stuff gets connected for you. And I had one student try to do this, and she's like, well, I ordered the book, but it won't come until the end of the semester. So it's forcing students into situations where they have to rely upon a impoverished information environment. And it's impoverished not because there's not a quantity of information, there's too great of a quantity of information, but because a sense of how information might be related other than the hyperlink, other than the next thing that's scrolled. There's no model of that. And so all of this space was being transformed. And people are like, well, the books have just come back. And yes, I know, I'm aware, those of you who are maybe watching this, who are from Northeastern, I know that they put some of the books back in. One of the things that they decided when they finally put the books back in, and they're still remodeling the library, is it's only the high circulation books. This is terrible. This is absolutely not how a research university ought to operate. High circulation books are what my local branch of the public library has. They're the books that are most popular for reading. What a research library should represent are the relationships between areas of knowledge that are not often accessed, because they can't be seen or preserved in a way where we just see it at the basis of circulation. Anyway, I have a lot more to say about that, and it's related to this thing about textbooks too, which is without the library as a kind of many of the things that libraries do. I mean, one of the things that libraries used to do as a very practical function was have books that were there for students to kind of go out for a particular course. You can put a book on reserve. This service was like not really accessible to students. I couldn't put a book on reserve. They didn't have enough copies of it, or they'd have to order it in. So it became this kind of messy thing. You couldn't put a book on reserve for students, which is a way of addressing equity questions about class and the affordability of books. But textbooks, I've never been a big fan of textbooks. This is not a position that's changed. It's just kind of hardened a lot, which is that textbooks not only are bad because the textbooks in my particular field are bad, which I think is the case. I find them to be extremely low quality in how they represent. But even in areas of learning, I mean, I'm not saying that all textbooks are bad and textbooks never used, but there's a major problem with textbooks that's much more emphatic at this point in time, because when there's this kind of constant social media background of information that's circulating, the textbook does represent a kind of alternative. It represents itself as a permanent basis of knowledge, and students relate that textbook to a particular class. And so they see a class with a textbook, and they say, this is a thing. And the subjectivity of that knowledge is being kind of selected by a group of people, organized in a particular way, presented in a certain form by the instructor of that class, moved through, that all these kinds of decisions are made about it, that they're not part of. That doesn't get seen as being part of knowledge or part of design. And I think that it's better, when possible, to offer a more confusing experience of saying, look at all of these different kinds of texts that are all talking about the same thing, but that have different styles, approach it at different moments in time. Some of them use difficult vocabulary, some of them use simple vocabulary, and that you can have an attitude that's different towards these as pieces of writing, pieces of knowledge, pieces of information, which is different from an attitude that you have towards the field as a whole. So giving people multiple ways in to knowledge and having a relationship to a text is, for me, really important. And I can ask students, did you hate this reading or did you love it? I can't ask that if I use a textbook. Did you hate the textbook or not? I mean, like, well, I found it useful. Or, no, I hated it because I hated the whole class. So the representative function that a textbook has of being a synecdoche for a whole field of knowledge can be very convenient, can be very useful when you're trying to do something. But I think, especially in the humanities, but not exclusively in the humanities, it represents a kind of less than critical relationship to knowledge that should be interrogated at the very least. And this goes to student reading. A lot of people, some of my colleagues, want to talk about with me and each other, how do we get these kids to read? They're not reading anything. And one of my colleagues recently, we had I bought everyone a round of drinks to celebrate the end of public speaking. And his position is, he's like, I think I'm just going to not do any reading. And I think this is a totally defensible position from a certain set of assumptions. If you assign reading to students, you're going to lose a certain number of them totally. Let's be generous and say 50% don't do the reading. I'm taking on the position. This is not my position. This is the position I think I'm trying to represent of other people who are like, reading is failing students because they don't do it. So students won't do the reading, about 50%. Let's say 30% will do the reading superficially, not really get it. 20% will kind of very diligently do the reading, and then they will try to control the classroom conversation, and the class becomes about the smartest students, and it leaves the other students behind. So this is an issue of kind of equity, but also just pedagogical effect. We want to reach as many students as possible. We believe that what we're talking about is important. And so for him, a kind of like open, simple lecture as a way to have students understand the contents, the so-called contents of the class, is better. And again, I don't disagree with this in some kind of hard and fast ethical principle. But I think that one of the issues here is that we imagine that reading is one thing, that there's one activity of reading. And that's the reason why students aren't doing it. Because when I ask students, so in the criticism class, the first diary entry is, what's your relationship to reading? What's the relationship between reading and thinking? What's your relationship to writing? What's the relationship between writing and thinking? Almost all of the students, when they talk about the relationship to reading, they'll say a number of things. One is that they, used to have they often kind of use the idea of relationship and they make it romantic, which is cute. They're like, we used to be close and then we broke up and we're not now. Now we're back together or whatever, something like that. But when they think about reading fiction, almost exclusively. That for them is the model of reading. The alternative is reading something academic. And academic reading is not a different activity. It's just stuff that's boring or stuff that's difficult. And so recognizing that a practice of reading has to be taught, has to be modeled, is, I think, a different alternative to the problem with student reading. Because I don't think the problem with student reading can be reduced to any of the following theories. Everyone's very distracted. There's a learning gap. Students are kind of behind. Most people read at a very low level. Reading is getting worse. I don't think these things are probably wrong. I think that they're probably true. I don't think that they address the nature of the problem, which is, why would we read in the first place? What are we trying to get out of reading? And if I just say, read this text, and the model that is in the student's mind is an enjoyable experience of reading a fictional text, where one reads at the beginning all the way through in a narrative sequence and gets lost, and then they try to do that with whether it's a textbook or, I think with textbook they actually do have different models of reading, which maybe is a part of the defense of the textbook, but I'm going to ignore that for now. I'm going to open a book or an article. I'm going to kind of start just at the beginning and go all the way through, and I'm immediately lost because it's part of a scholarly conversation that's referencing things that have happened that are not in the text. They're kind of before that. So showing this, reading together a little bit and saying where do we get lost, and actually modeling the confusion that comes from reading and how to address it. Changing expectations for reading. My expectation for reading in my classes, I really have a lot of discussion-based classes, is that you come in with something to say about the text, which can be, I didn't understand it. And actually that's extremely valuable to be able to articulate a certain portion of the text that you didn't understand and try to offer reasons why. So any attitude towards reading is acceptable, I think, is one of the things. To talk about different practices of reading as concretely as we possibly can, and by modeling reading as a practice collectively in class, but taking some piece of text, taking hopefully multiple different ones, thinking about genre, thinking about approaches to it. I think for me, this is going to be an important model going forward. I don't know what it's like at the new university that I'm at. I would say students at Northeastern tend to be, I'm impressed Another reason I don't agree is I'm impressed, given the stuff that I assign. I assign some difficult works. How many students and how many students do the reading, or do some of the reading, which is fine by me, and how many of them are capable of making some sense out of it. Because I intentionally assign texts that are over their heads, not to make them feel bad, but to show that there's going to be there's got to be some other way in here than just saying, well, what are the key concepts, like in a textbook. That there's a reason to expand our view of what's happening by dealing with stuff that doesn't immediately address us exactly where we are. So that's my kind of view about it. I've obviously used this channel as another thing of reading these things aloud and commenting on them. I think that's been. I have mixed feelings about that. I know there's some students that really like that a lot, and they're kind of need that to kind of get into the readings in some way. I think I could have done a better job with some of the. They're very long videos. They go on and on and on. But I think also modeling reading a full text has an advantage of showing that something that how does someone who is not necessarily I'm definitely more familiar with these kind of texts that I assign than they are. How does somebody else kind of make their way through it? And it's kind of go back to modeling something, modeling rather than rubricing, modeling reading or modeling speech rather than rubricing it out. But I don't know. I am of mixed feelings about it. Okay, let's go on to some learning software stuff. Look at all this learning software that I've used or tried to use. Some of it's not obviously learning software, and I'm just going to do some quick hits on this, I hope. We all kind of know what Zoom is like, I think, or I thought. I don't know anymore. We now migrated to Teams as a university, but I'm still using Zoom. Zoom class was a big part of everyone's experience, and what are my takeaways from Zoom? I remember saying one thing at the end to them of my online speaking class was we have this thing called speaker mode and gallery mode. And speaker mode is a bad model of communication, which is we're all here looking at this person. But gallery mode is that's the goated way of thinking about online communication, is staying in gallery mode all the time, and kind of recognizing the uncertainty of these are all black boxes, or I don't know what it means that this person's just left the room. Is their cat there? That kind of deep uncertainty that comes from the gallery mode is a better model than speaker mode. But Zoom is, I don't have as much to say about Zoom as some of the other things. I probably should, but I'm tired of talking about Zoom. Canvas, Blackboard, learning management systems in general. My main takeaway is avoid them when you can. Students are very used to them. There's a major advantage to putting stuff on Canvas, which is what we use now. We began with Blackboard and we migrated again. They're this is where they see everything else. Everything is done through this. I find it just the way that it's designed to be counter to some of my pedagogical goals. So that's the main reason, but I also just find I don't like the design of it very well. And I understand that we need this in order to have integration into other information systems in the university. So I'll put grades there. That's basically it. So that's been my relationship to that. Discord I started using in the pandemic, looking at what other people were doing with it, mostly Steve Yano, who I modeled my Discord after his. And I found it to be very successful. I don't know exactly what the future of the Discord that I've created, Rhetoric Central, is going to be, but I think I'll keep it around. I would like to still use it for classes. I think some of the students that communicate with me through Discord, I've had a lot of teaching there on calls, with voice messages, with text back and forth, that would literally not be possible through email. And I was looking at earlier today some of the early emails that were sent, and I'm I literally wouldn't have been able to teach this way if I was doing this all through email. Because the genre of email is so much kind of slower and laborious, and that kind of quick response ability to have a conversation in multiple modalities has become really important to me. I want to keep that. In terms of the using Discord for the classes, I think there's downsides to it. Major downside is there's some students that remain confused the whole time. They never come to talk to me about it, and they're just they don't see what's going on because they're not using it. And it makes them kind of have to learn a thing other than what they're already familiar with. That is a major downside to it. But there's also the side of like, hey, the sense that this is like a real person and there's other stuff going on in the world. Many students who I taught a long time ago told me that like I like constantly am posting articles and news stuff in the sections that are not about classes, and a lot of people like read those, and we have conversations about them oftentimes in the background. They don't like to post as much in the public channels. So I think that there's something to kind of trying to create an intellectual community through software that learning management software is not really about. Though maybe I'll skip to GoReact. I'm going to try GoReact for the summer because I want to be able to give really rich feedback on speeches, and even though they have to pay for it, I can't think of a better way. So I'm not like against learning software. I just think that the model of learning software is that learning is a thing that you're doing all alone, and I really hate the kind of surveillance software plugins and things that are being used right now in order to stop cheating. This is a failure of imagination. Another thing that I've used in a lot of classes was, I'm just going to like pull this out so that doesn't happen again. Are we good? No. All right. Let me fix it. Oh, it fixed it. I'm still so bad at this. I'm talking about software. I'm just like, I can't even do OES. What a failure. Google Drive, Google Docs. Having students write stuff directly in a Google Doc. Other people can see it. I can see it. There's direct and immediate feedback. Again, the sense of privacy. I don't think that students have an expectation of privacy like they used to. They don't really believe in it. So maybe I'm taking advantage of that. Some students are a little bit nervous about it at first. But then they quickly realize, they're like, my peers are not going to take the time to like slowly go through, and like nobody has the time to do that. So having kind of like ongoing documents to me is going to be really valuable for thinking about pedagogy in the future, of stuff that gives you a sense of the provisional, can really make revision a real practical concrete thing. We can look at different version histories of a document. I find that to be really valuable. It does have something to do, with AI, and being able to see something in process does at least give me an indication that a human is involved and that I can have conversations with them. But I think pedagogically, it's a better way of thinking about writing as process rather than as product. So I think I'll probably continue to use Google Docs rather than the submission of a complete PDF file that is locked. We've used PDF has become the standard, the industry standard. And it's like, it's so weird because PDF is like this idea all about kind of like legal permissions, locking things down, making things feel like an object or a document in a digital space. And that to me is exactly the problem of how much of the digital technology is being used for educational purposes. It's to make things feel singular, one-off, completed, locked in, legal documents. That the legal document becomes the kind of model of the document of knowledge, or the educational product, or something like that. So I think that there's a lot of problems with using Google, but I like the digital document better than the PDF. Simply Analytics, this is just a little story of like, here there was a lot of, actually both of these stories, the XR and the Simply Analytics, are related. Of like, when I was doing business and professional speaking early on, I was like, I want to have them do like a market research assignment. And they're like, great. And I like went to talk to the librarians, and they're like, we'll talk to the business librarian. He's like, yeah, you can use this software, Simply Analytics. He's like, I'll even come in to talk to students about it. I was like, great, come on in. Gave him time to talk about it with the students. He didn't give a very good presentation. He just did a very simple overview. And then I was like, okay, we're going to use this for an assignment. And then the students were immediately like, I can't log in. And I looked at it. There's only a license for 5 people to use it at a time. So there's a lot of like the licensing of software and its relationship to the educational environment, I've found, at least at Northeastern, to be something that's extremely not thought about in a shocking way. The XR story goes to this as well, because we have this big, new, shiny, it's not really that shiny, it's just kind of a very ugly room, but with Meta Quest headsets, various kinds of Meta-based XR things. And so one of my colleagues, she was did her diligence about it, and there's a lot of messaging from the dean that everyone should get involved. Everyone should bring their classes and try to find integration. I was like, well, what do we want this integration for? I put aside my skepticism for a moment and say, I don't know. We'll see what they have. We went to the XR lab. They're like, come 15 minutes ahead of time. We did. I had done everything. I downloaded the app, and they're like, okay, great. Put on the thing. I was kind of feeling a little bit out of sorts with the headset, and he was like, it's fine. I ended up feeling like sick for the rest of the day. I know other people that did it felt sick even longer than that. So they weren't attending that much to the like physical side of this. But that's not even really my complaint. That could be fixed with just a little bit more care. The issue that I had was we were in there for almost an hour, and they're like, well, all this stuff needs to download. They're like, yeah, we're sorry the download is really bad. We're sharing this Wi-Fi. And I was like, well, I have to kind of go. Like, I have to do other things today. Like, I can't sit here for 3 hours waiting for this thing to download. I was like, I don't want to be offensive, but can you just explain why? Like, I did come ahead of time. Like, why couldn't you have downloaded the software beforehand? What was explained to me, and I'm taking it from this one person who wasn't even like the lead person there, because the lead person had to go to a meeting about how important this stuff is, and he was he apparently expressed to my colleague, he's like, this happens all the time, and like my job is basically managing people's expectations, because it's like people keep having bad experiences. Meta makes it so that the legal requirement to use one of the headsets is that it's associated with a single phone or device. So every time someone comes in, after they leave, they have to factory reset the headset. And then you have to link it to a new phone and download all of the software, which means that literally every time that a class comes in, they're just sitting there waiting for things to download, and then the class is over and they leave again, which is like the perfect self-licking ice cream cone, except you don't even get to, there's not even ice cream to look at. There's nothing going on. So the idea that technology, I'm sure the optical technology of the MetaQuest headset is really impressive, but the use of this technology, its relationship, the legal restrictions on it, make it totally inappropriate for an educational environment in which you need to share this technology rapidly and often and commonly. So I thought that was a really interesting experience. I thought I was going to write something about it, but I never got around to it because other stuff came up. I talked a little bit about GoReact. ChatGPT, everyone's been freaking out about ChatGPT. Everyone's heard about it. My kind of sense of it is like ChatGPT is really great for rhetorical purposes, to be like, what's the common sense view of on anything? What Quintilian talks about, kind of like the straight line. What's the straight line view? And I can always get that, and then we can immediately say, so this is not good enough. What can we do that's different than that? So I found that to be really valuable. People were all, and I know that this is happening other places, but like I didn't detect a huge amount of ChatGPT use. I suspect it in a few cases. As students were using ChatGPT. I just read one and I was just like, yeah, she used ChatGPT pretty clearly. But in the cases where I was doing good writing pedagogy and I was like having it done as a process, I almost wish they'd used more ChatGPT. Like they clearly didn't. They couldn't have. So I think some of the freak out about kind of writing essays through ChatGPT comes from this model of writing as a product, and you submit it at the end, and then you're held liable or accountable for everything you say. So I don't think this is this is not the problem with ChatGPT is plagiarism. There's plagiarism maybe on the back end. What's up, Alan? We're talking about the tech side of things, so you came at the right time. Talking about ChatGPT. I think the concerns are overblown. With plagiarism, I think it points to problems in how we imagine writing pedagogy. I think there are issues with ChatGPT. Like I think it's a transformative. I think I'm not one of these people who are like, oh, AI is nothing. I think AI is the many different technologies that we are naming as AI right now are going to have transformative effects. And my friend Nick was talking about it once. He was like, one of the nice images that I took from him is like, well, all of the students will submit their AI essays, and all of the professors will give them AI comments, and then we can finally meet again outside with coffee and have a real conversation, which was a funny joke, but for me is kind of like there's something to it. There's something to like, well, can we automate? As I know if you do anything twice, automate it, right? Isn't that kind of like the programmer's motto? It's like, well, if we're can we automate some of the bullshit stuff, and maybe that will actually open up to that more uncertain thing. Where I feel like real education happens again. So I'm not feeling super upset about ChatGPT. Yeah, with resumes and HR screening, it's like, no, it's exact. But I mean, the condition is different, right? Because the evaluation of all of these resumes by AI means that you have to use AI in order to kind of do it. But there's no other thing, right? It's just like, do I get the job or not? But where in the educational environment, it's like, nobody really cares about that. Like, it's busy work for both parties. And so for me, it's like, a lot of people are attached to that because they feel like this is where their seriousness comes in, that they kind of enforce plagiarism rules or things like that. But if we did take the approach of like, no, that actually is just automated, and like the machine can run itself, the university can produce its own bullshit papers over and over and over again, that actually creates a space for something else. But, you know, you're right. I mean, this is happening in the world in ways that are not, I don't know. Maybe it's good for HR too. I don't know. I have a friend who works in people analytics in HR. I should ask her about it. Then I have some more theoretical themes that I wanted to talk a little bit about to myself and to all of you, since you decided to come hear me talk about it, that I'm maybe taking away. I have like so much stuff to say. Oh, okay, cool. I'd love to know like what the cutting edge stuff is, because I don't really know enough about these things. I've like tried to explain. I know that I understand ChatGPT like a little bit better than some people who think it's like a database of knowledge. I'm like, okay, but I'm not like well equipped to explain, you know, everything about how it works and the best usages of it. I've been disappointed by, you know, there's all these committees that we have about like how to use AI, but it's mostly just panic. It's mostly just panic about and complaining that I've seen. I'm sure there's good stuff that people are doing that I haven't seen, but I think that integrating AI into classrooms in different ways can be valuable. But we need a little more imagination. So any imaginative takes I'll take. So one of the other things, this is kind of related because this is like part of the AI pushes. Like it showed the weakness of this rhetoric that comes from the university of like, well, the universities are all about skills, all about giving people skills for the workforce. There's not really even much of a and anymore. Like that's from the official channels. That's kind of all you get. That's what students say. And it makes sense if the price tag is this high and the promise is, well, what makes it worth it is that you can pay this off someday and make, you know, good money. This has to be addressed. But I think it's like the rhetoric of skills, and Steve and I have talked about this before too, I think is a real issue. One is that like coding boot camps, like I have a lot of computer science students, and when you look at the data, I mean, there are the huge layoffs in tech that are making students wary. They're finding it difficult to find co-ops. Engineering students as well are finding it difficult. Not just software engineering students. And these are STEM degrees. They were promised that this would be the path to a secure life. But the data hasn't changed that dramatically. It's kind of about 2/3 of people who have a degree in these fields get a job immediately after graduating. And that's not that different from the humanities. So this connection between skills and job placement is not empirical, not based on strong data that I've seen. It's, I think, an ideology about what education does, and that education separates you because you are able to do something that someone else isn't. And that's really what a skill means. It means that I am skilled and you are unskilled. And this is part of what the university does, is that it reinforces and creates divisions between different segments of the labor pool, to which are attached various kinds of incentives and disincentives, forms of discipline and things like that. But it's also clear that this is like not how things really are operating, that if you have skills, you're protected. There's no skill that will guarantee you a job. And people can, and the more competitive that a skill gets, if that's what we're doing, then the more selective the labor market can be. So now getting a law degree doesn't, people are making very little money on law degrees, and they're paying, top dollar to get a law degree. you can go look at all the evidence for this. So this pushes towards these degrees that are supposed to be safe, create more competition, and then they become less valuable in just simple monetary terms. So what's an alternative to this kind of skill rhetoric that's about superiority to others, about a false promise of safety? And I think it's something like habit, and developing habits that keep us capable of learning and keep us capable of adapting. And so a market-focused version of this is to talk about the different nature of contemporary job markets that are constantly asking people to change what they're capable of doing, to be able to be fluid, to kind of move around. And so that idea of fluidity or adaptability is not a skill, but we can give habits to think about how to approach these changing conditions. And this is something that might be part of the rhetoric for defending something more like a general education or a humanistic education to be important alongside scientific, technical, and business education. I think the other thing, though, about habit is that, like, habit is always being formed. So we don't have to kind of worry whether someone is having a habit. And so a lot of the way we can think about education is not just positive, giving people something that they don't have. Everyone already has habits, even though they don't have skills. So some of what education is about criticism of bad habits. And I've been thinking about this in terms of scientific communication recently. Like, what's supposed to be the standard of scientific communication in a democracy? And a lot of people who talk about science communication are like, people need to know, like Jay Leno used to do these things like, look at these idiots on the street, they don't even know basic geography. It's like, well, why is geography the standard of knowledge? It's easy to make people look stupid. What do we actually want from a public to understand about scientific knowledge and understanding? To me, weirdly, the thing I've been going back to is a kind of early modern standard, which is they need to know enough to not be superstitious. But my way of thinking about superstition is different. It's not positive knowledge, it's negative knowledge. Because people want to form belief. People are in the habit of belief formation, and they want to have a kind of narrative or story. And so showing the problems about how knowledge might be formed in those various areas where people are anxious is, for me, a real democratic service. Same thing with higher education, that students don't come in with being like, here is a clear area in which I don't know. You don't know what you don't know most of the time. And so having kind of habits of learning that allow us to dwell and approach our ignorance makes us genuinely more capable human beings, because we're not stuck on what we already know and what we already believe. So I'm going to be a big defender of habit going forward. I remember first coming across habit in the work of Charles Sanders Peirce when I was in grad school as like a serious concept, and I was like, I very turned off by it. And then I got really Peirce-headed. I got really Peirce-brained for a while. Still kind of am. And I think differently about habit now. When considered in the light of ChatGPT, huge portions of the conversations are effectively superstitious. Oh, absolutely. Like, some of my very smart friends and who even work in industries where this is used didn't understand, like, the simple things about how large language models work, like tokenization and training models. They thought that they were like large databases of information. So yeah, there's just very, very basic confusion, which we could call superstition. You know, I'm not using that term because I want to be provocative. It's just, I have my own weird lexicon for things, but yeah, exactly. So then I want to talk a little bit about, let's go to techno fetishism for a second, which is, I kind of already addressed with the XR stuff a little bit, because for me, this is like a good example of what I'm calling techno fetishism. But this is like the idea that knowledge is effective when it produces an effect. So like the place for a negative knowledge is just totally not there in the techno fetishist thing. So one thing was in talking with the chair once, I had this memorable conversation with the chair of my department. Not for her or really anything that she said to me from her own person, but something she reported as part of a conversation with the dean, which was about the humanities, which are called here. We have a brand. Everything is branded here. It's called humanics, because even the humanities has to have kind of like robotics involved or some kind of technology involved in order for it to be legitimate. And it comes from a book that the president wrote called Robot Proof, and that this is the model of like the place of the humanities is to make people irreplaceable in the labor market by automation. That's not really how it feels like what it is to be here. It doesn't feel like I am irreplaceable because it's not really how we've been treated as faculty, but without just being cynical, that's too easy. I think the techno-fetishistic thing, so what the dean said was, in response to humanities stuff, or I was like, oh yeah, I'm kind of a critical scholar. I was like, yeah, I do criticism or whatever. And she's like, oh yeah. She's like, well, as the dean said, it can't all be critical thinking. So there's critical thinking, but it can't all be critical thinking. I was like, that's a very good, speaking of technology, recursive definition of the university's point of view. What is critical thinking? It can't all be critical thinking. That's the university's current understanding of critical thinking. And I'm like, that's a very interesting position of like, well, we do critical thinking in a certain way, but that's basically a kind of sideline that has to do with ideals that we don't really believe in. Things like civics or democracy or whatever, blah, 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 blah. We don't really believe in that. What we really believe in is technological rationality, because that has effects in the world and because it brings in money. And this is a very kind of simple thing, but why is technological thinking not critical? And this is, to me, what I mean by techno-fetishism. It's not that I'm saying that, like, oh, God, I'm here right now able to talk to you because of this amazing technology that we have. And we live in a technical society. It's right at the heart of everything that we do. And this is, to me, what I mean by techno-fetishism isn't that we're constantly surrounded by technology, we need to go back to nature or something like that. It's that, no, this is where we need critical thinking the most. What kinds of digital environments are we living in? What's the nature of the technological products that we're producing? What's the effects that they have on us? And this requires technical knowledge, but the separation of technical knowledge from any kind of critical point of view shows a very basic problem with where the university stands in relationships to society today, where the research of the university and the funding of the university is focused on scientific and technical progress, even though it doesn't produce that, largely because of its own insane way of thinking about how scientific progress works, which is all about kind of measuring the number of papers that you produce, which, okay, that's a whole nother conversation that everybody knows about. Not everybody. My students are very interested in that, actually. Surprisingly fascinated. Because students don't really understand how research is funded. So they think that their tuition is funding research. They don't understand that. So it's good to talk about that stuff. But yeah, I think it's this very basic problem. Ain't no one irreplaceable at all. Depends on what you're trying to do make. When the horse-drawn buggy went away, so did the buggy whip manufacturers. Yeah, exactly. I think it's just the wrong model for thinking about what education should be doing. And it's like, I don't want to teach people to be able to survive a labor market that runs on financial quarters. Like, it's actually a very extremely limited way of thinking about it, even for the purpose of someone having a long-term job. Like, if you're thinking about the labor market and the extreme ups and downs that we've had in the last 25 years, like the idea that you could take an image of automation that as we understand. When he wrote the book, there wasn't such a thing as large language models that were commercially or accessible to people. So it's like your book is already not robot proof, right? So it's kind of too easy to criticize. But for me, it's this question of rather than trying to make people irreplaceable, trying to recognize that to live in a technical civilization, as we do, is actually what requires us to have a general education, which is why everyone should have access to higher education, but also why higher education shouldn't be skill-based. It shouldn't be organized around the imperatives of the technological industry, which is trying to produce profit. There has to be a kind of critical relationship to our society because our society is technical. That's my thing about techno-fetishism. Student anxiety. What have I learned here? Link for later. AI isn't used. Oh, okay. I'll definitely look at that. So citation needed. I feel like I've encountered that before, and I know not just from Wikipedia, but I'll take a look. Thank you. I think I have a pretty unorthodox view about this. Let me try to represent what I think are the more orthodox views. One is that student anxiety is an effect of mental health. or what we're calling mental health. Various kinds of mental illness or disorders or abnormalities or neurodivergences that students have and are manifesting for complicated reasons that we can't know, and it's not our job to know, and I'm not a professional therapist. So when I encounter student anxiety, I have the choice of to accommodate them through kind of changes as much, but basically I refer them away. I refer them to mental health professionals. And so there's a kind of professional obligation that I have to treat anxiety professionally. That's, I would say that is the kind of standard understanding. That's like the HR understanding, like, you know, you accommodate when you can and then otherwise refer them to help. The other, I think, pretty common attitude is it's all bullshit. Student anxiety is just a, I hope this doesn't get clipped out like I'm saying this myself. It's all kayfabe. Students use it cynically in order to get out of their responsibilities because they're weak-willed and lack discipline as students. And so it's kind of all happening in bad faith. Or there's social contagion. The kids are on TikTok and everyone's saying that, you know, you have to have, like, your mental health is going badly because of like a special feature of who you are. So that's what's going on. I don't agree with the first one that it's all unreal at all. I think there is something to the social contagion bit, but not in the way that makes it easy to dismiss at all. But I think my own attitude is a little different, maybe because so much of my focus and teaching has been on public speaking, but I think that there's good anxiety. And I don't think all anxiety is good. Anxiety can be very bad. It can be very harmful. It's distressing. But beyond being distressing, anxiety can leave effects on us, on our psyches, on our bodies that are bad for us. So this is not a kind of like, I'm signing off on like, be a little anxious. It's good. But I'm saying actually there's a certain kind of anxiety that is good. And I think that we have to be kind of careful here because a certain interpretation of this can be seen as a different position, because those positions are much more as a kind of like anti-psychiatric point of view, or it's all made up point of view, which is not my point of view really at all. My point of view is that there are different vocabularies that allow us to, and I was talking about this with a friend actually before this call. We were talking about this in relationship to the Zhuangzi, the ancient Chinese text, but also contemporary subjectivity and how people relate to it. I think that there is, because of this extremely scientized discourse that we have now, where everyone is anxious about subjectivity's appearance at all. Subjectivity feels arbitrary, that people want a kind of way of experiencing their subjectivity as objective. And there is a way in which that makes social contagion possible for self-diagnosis, for recognizing some subjective feature of myself as real because it's part of an objective discourse, that its reality can't be subjective. Subjectivity has no basis. And I think that for me is a major issue and a major part of this. And it's actually at the source of some of the anxiety that I think is good. That who are you when you're speaking, when you're thinking, when you're trying to form a position on something? Who are you when you feel responsible or grateful? Those things that kind of feel like they pull you in a certain direction, that are impersonal and not obvious and physically manifested in the world, might really be that way. That might really be what and who you are. And so education should prepare us for the reality of subjectivity. I think at the very minimum, and I don't think that we're doing that today. So anxiety can be a place where that question is opened up for someone about who am I really, and that the wrong response is to come in with a set of answers, to professionalize that, to say, well, because you're having that question and you're feeling really anxious about it, and you want an answer, here's an answer. You're having a problem with your mind, and you need to go talk to a professional. I think that it's a risky business because how do I distinguish good and bad anxiety? I don't know that there's a kind of sign that would tell me. But that's part of my own responsibility with my own subjectivity of making judgments that are uncertain about students and about other people that about everybody. Everybody's in this kind of position. So I think thinking about anxiety pedagogically as something that we should expect, as something that comes about from the conditions in which knowledge is introduced, produced, disseminated, that someone may feel anxious because they're expected to know something that they don't, or someone might feel anxious because they're expected to say something as knowledge which they don't believe to be knowledge. That's actually the conditions of classrooms and the university that produce anxiety, and that anxiety can therefore be good because it preserves an alternative viewpoint, which is within one subject, sort of, and that relating to anxiety and like dealing with it in some way, not therapeutically, in the sense of here's the way that, let me help you interpret your anxiety so that you can alleviate it in your life, or here are some drugs so you can deal with anxiety's presentation that prevents you from acting a certain way. That might be important for some people, but dealing with anxiety of being like, how would you articulate your anxiety? What is anxious now? And then hearing what discourse comes back. Oftentimes the discourse that I hear is the already answered one of, I'm anxious because I'm an anxious person. There's nothing you can do about it. Full defense of anxiety. Or I'm anxious because I'm bad at this. Or I am stupid. And we see that at the basis of anxiety is a subjective interpretation of someone's capability or possibility. And so trying to acknowledge the reality of that, understanding, but also not endorsing it, is, I think, really important for education in this day and age. And now with the false obligations bit, I want to talk a little bit about my own problem with this, my own anxieties that I've had that are a little bit embarrassing. Like, I feel like, the last 5 years I've been doing a lot of stuff. When I look back, I'm like, why was I doing it? I didn't believe in it. I didn't think it was valuable. I just felt this kind of sense that this was a thing I was supposed to do. That no one communicated to me. Nobody asked me to do. No one told me I had to. No one was looking over my shoulder. I just felt this kind of imperative. And I'm sure that this is probably true for a lot of occupations, where you feel a sense of like, well, I have to do this, especially professional occupations. Someone once said that behind every profession is human inability. And I think this is right. Law, we can't make the law be effective through knowledge. Medicine, no matter how scientifically advanced we get, like, bodies will not become well. Health will not remain permanent. People will die. And education, what are we even trying to do? Does imposter syndrome come up a lot in your circles? It's a lot in tech, and it is close to what you're talking about. Yeah, imposter syndrome has come up a lot. And yeah, maybe I should talk a little bit about that before I go into the false obligations thing. I'm a skeptic of imposter syndrome, not because I don't think people really experience it. I think people do experience it profoundly and deeply as this kind of anxiety of like, the subject that I am being asked to be is not the one that I am. And we feel this kind of gap. I guess why I'm a skeptic of it is I think that term endorses an interpretation of saying one of two things. Either you're not an imposter, you belong here, you are good, and you are valid. This kind of a priori validation that everyone should have. And I don't say this from this kind of thing like, oh, everyone gets a participation trophy. It's because it's actually condescending. It like doesn't really address who someone is and like what they, obviously many people are in jobs where they feel not prepared. Like, I know that I'm not prepared for certain things that I do. And like, I know from people who've told me stories, like my dad used to work for Westinghouse. I'm not going to go through all of the things that he's told me, but like my dad was not an engineer. My dad didn't finish college, and he was like doing stuff that an engineer should be doing. It's like someone with an advanced degree. Weird things happen where you're like, yeah, maybe I'm not the person that should be doing this. So in the situation where like you really feel that, the interpretation of it, like this is a subjective problem with me, rather than being like, well, maybe it's right, and maybe that's a problem, and I need to like go and figure out how to solve that problem. Like I need to be an adaptable person and be like, how can I get some help here? Rather than being like, I'm an imposter, I don't belong here, if everybody finds out, they'll fire me. That's like a really bad interpretation of how to be in the workforce. But on the alternative, like there is a way that it becomes, there is a kind of narcissistic enjoyment of imposter syndrome of being like, it could, no matter how good I am, there's something, I'll never live up to what I'm not really who I pretend to be. There's always this kind of distance between my achievements and my actual ability. And I think it comes from like a spiritualization of labor, that means that what you're capable of doing is something like a quality of your soul. And I think this is a bad interpretation. So I think that one of the answers to imposter syndrome is to recognize that labor is always collective in some way. And if you're feeling a lot of imposter syndrome, you can go talk to people about what you're feeling, but maybe like try to do stuff with other people and see how they do it. See what those differences are, and don't immediately have a judgment that one way is good and one way is bad. And just see like, well, why do I do it this way and why did someone else do it that way? I don't know. I guess I have more to say about it, but I guess I'll just say that for now. We can keep talking about it if you want. But it relates to that sense of false obligation, because the imposter syndrome, feels like it's coming from outside. Like, oh, there's all these demands upon me that need to be met, but I don't know where they're coming from. They're kind of impersonal, and I can't feel like I live up to them. I didn't experience it as imposter syndrome. I just experienced it as this kind of like ethical urgency that I needed to meet. But really, I think, and it relates to my criticism of imposter syndrome, it alleviated me from recognizing like I'm the one that's saying that I need to do that. So I got to kind of perform this thing with myself, being like, oh, I don't really want to do this. This isn't really good, but I feel like I have to do it. So if it doesn't come out okay, or if it doesn't really work, it's like, no, what I really should have done is the more ethically courageous and right thing was to be like, I'm not doing this. There's no reason to do this, and I will defend my decision. And so kind of taking on a subjectivity that is uncertain, but also self-respecting, I think means questioning these impersonal imperatives that we experience in our personal and our work lives. Okay, I guess I'll not say more than that. But for me, this was a kind of one of my major failings in the last 5 years, is I spent a lot of time and energy doing stuff that I didn't believe in, and for a reason that I couldn't explain to anybody else, because nobody else was asking me to do it. Even though I maybe sensed that they desired it in some way, why should that have been what was determining what I do? It's kind of giving away too much of the game. Finally, intellectual community. I think you're always capable of finding, this is another failing of mine. I wish I had spent more time developing an intellectual community here. Some of it happened to do with the pandemic. So, I was in a reading group. I joined some reading groups, and went to some of those meetings, which was nice early on while I was here. Recently, one of my colleagues and I have started a reading group that's become a kind of collaborative project, long-term project that we're working on. But nevertheless, I think I kind of have the desire to have an intellectual community with my students as a scholar and as a researcher. And I think this is actually a mistake in some ways. In some ways, I think it's right. In some ways, it's a mistake, because it took me away from some of the discipline of being a scholar, which is the social discipline, which I'm not very good at, of finding ways to connect what you're thinking and what you're doing to what other people's work is about. And maybe because I feel really down on my field, I've encouraged a lot of cynicism towards myself, of being like, oh, well, they don't understand. And I would go out of my way and do huge amounts of effort for one individual to help them with their scholarship, for instance, and then be disappointed that it didn't work out. Well, this is just the wrong way to build community. It's you're not doing it right. So I think one thing that is really important is to recognize that our intellectual communities are things we have to make. They're not pre-made for us. We're not going to kind of arrive and find them, and we can make them in lots of different places. It could be online, it could be on Twitch, but there's also a kind of discipline in not being cynical about the failure of a community to form, either through yourself, your own lack of action, or, your disappointment in other people's various kinds of shortcomings or whatever. And it's kind of like a neighborhood, which is there's always going to be problems. And you can look to the problems of the neighborhood and be like, wow, the neighborhood's really bad. Or you can be like, I'm in the neighborhood. You know, what do I want to do here? How do I want to live here? How can I make a life for myself here with other people? So I've been thinking a little bit differently about intellectual community. And I think this is something I need to reform in my own practice. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about vocation, which is, a term that's been in my life for a long time because it has a deep religious significance in the way I was brought up. Kind of finding your vocation. Speaking of demands that kind of come from nowhere, the idea of vocation that I was raised with was your vocation finds you. You're called to something, and you have to respond to that call. And so there's this kind of interesting ethical relationship and this theological idea, which is what you need to do in your life is in some sense already decided. But you have a duty to figure out what that is. And there's no clear way to find that out. So, the theological interpretation, you need a lot of prayer and thought, but kind of experiment too in order to figure out what your vocation is. I had an interesting evening once recently where for some reason I went off on like a long sort of kind of reverie about a commencement ceremony, graduation, which I don't really like these ceremonies. I'm just not interested. I'm sorry. I know some of my students want me to come. I'm just like, if there were more tickets, I would or whatever. But I'm not that interested in the ceremonial things. Well, why? But why are there these ceremonies? And I think one of the things that's very obvious about a graduation ceremony is like, well, the ceremony at that point isn't going to be about job placement. If someone gets up as a commencement speaker, they're like, wow, you guys are going to get such good jobs, they're like missing the moment. Even if that's what everything else is about, this kind of points to this other value that is preserved literally through its medieval garb of, what is that other value? And for me, it's kind of vocation. And it's not that vocation is you are going to get a job that's a professional job, but rather it's about creating a vocational subject. You can see a theme through all of these themes that I have, obsessions maybe, which is someone who's capable of being called by the impersonal. And it goes back to the anxiety thing. Like sometimes that feeling of like something is calling me to act or live differently is experienced. If you experience it as like imposter syndrome, you're like, well, wait a minute. What if I really need to do something differently? Would I be able to be called, or do I already see it as a problem that I feel that way and I don't measure up? It's like, well, wait a minute. But I think it's a much more disturbing issue to me when I think there are people that are very well-adjusted people who are very goal-oriented people, highly capable, intelligent people who are not capable of being called out of the track of life that they are on. And so I guess one of the things that I'm taking out of Northeastern is a slightly different philosophy of education, which brings me back to this idea from my upbringing of vocation. But rather than teaching being my vocation, which I think is probably the case in more than one way, but one of the roles of higher education, and especially the elements of higher education that I do that are not, even though they call my classes skill-based classes because I teach speaking, which is a skill, is making people capable of answering to a call that comes not from them or from society, but from something else. That impersonal sense that they have something that they need to do, to recognize that and to be able to respond to that without that being something that completely, dismantles their life. And without that being a kind of source of just anxiety, that it can be an ethical orientation to life, that the purpose of your life is not to be decided by you alone, but also not to be decided by any other particular person or group. The purpose of your life is discovered within it as this calling. And can you hear it? Can you hear what you're being called to? So I guess that's kind of like that might seem melodramatic, but to me is actually kind of a humble orientation towards what education might be about now, which isn't about kind of making people future geniuses or great scholars or like amazing citizens of a democracy, but just being able to answer the call of their own life with some wherewithal and courage. So that's kind of all I had to talk through. I mean, I have much more I could keep saying, but it's been about 2 hours. And I appreciate those of you who decided to drop in and hear me ramble about my vocation for the last 5 years and where it's been. And I hope that you'll keep tuning in and keep talking as you see me do weird stuff with this channel in the future, both the Twitch and the YouTube. I don't know about Twitch anymore. I think I'm going to give Twitch a little bit more of a shot, but I don't know if the Twitch thing is as necessary as I thought it was. So we'll see. I don't know. But anyway, thanks again, and I'll see you soon. I hope. Bye.